Texas, recognized for any questions he has for the panel.
Thank the chairman. Quick question for either Mr. Joyce or Ms. Bice, either one. We've heard some facts thrown around here about adherence to the FRA. And my recollection was that there was a significant amount of conversations going on between both Chair Murray and Ranking Member Collins about tacking on an additional $14 billion in additional 24 spending, as well as add emergency funding on top of the $23 billion that they were negotiating on the side. And a lot of that's still fluid. But my point is, it's not exactly a 100% adherence over on the Senate side to the exact terms of the FRA. Is that, would you agree, based on my understanding, that that's correct?
Based on your understanding, that is correct. And I would also add that they haven't actually been able to get anything across the finish line either. They've passed these out of committee, but they haven't put anything on the floor as well.
And might I add, in addition to that reality, that what we're talking about here, albeit disagreements on the relative level of spending in this deal for the Department of Defense and veterans versus non-defense, non-veteran spending, recognizing that is different than the FRA structure, that the overall spending level is maybe not to the dollar, but effectively commensurate the same at a top line level as the FRA deal, for better or worse. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so in trying to keep with the spirit of the FRA deal, even for those who voted for it or those who voted against it, that is what is true about this proposal currently before us, correct?
That is correct.
And is it not also correct that in this proposal before us, we maintain the level of defense spending that was passed in the FRA?
That is correct.
And is it not also correct that we are maintaining the level of veteran spending, whether it's through the FRA, it's the same as basically 2023 plus a couple of billion, but we're keeping that the same, correct?
Correct.
So what we're trying to accomplish in this piece of legislation, and I'm speaking to some of my conservative brothers and sisters in this, I hesitate to use the word august body, that we are then reducing spending for the remainder, the non-defense, non-veteran discretionary spending, by just over 8%. Is that correct across the board?
That is correct.
Now, in doing so, we are basically, that would be about half of what it would take to get to what many in this conference wanted to achieve, which is getting back to pre-COVID level area spending of 2019. In other words, about 8% would get you about halfway there for, again, the non-defense, non-veterans discretionary spending. Does that sound right to you? That's what I understand from people studying the numbers.
I will take your word for that.
I think that is roughly correct. And so my point of bringing that up is to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who unsurprisingly criticize the 8% reductions and walk through the parade of horribles. But remember that at some point here, we have to get off the merry-go-round. We have to recognize what we're doing to the American people, our economy, and spending with respect to inflation. And we're trying to find a path to any sort of fiscal responsibility or sensibility. And that the response from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is effectively a generic statement of taxation. And so I would ask the gentlelady, the ranking member, I would ask, yes. Would it be your preference that we have a $2 trillion deficit this year? Do you believe we should increase taxes $2 trillion? In other words, or stated differently, $20 trillion over 10 years.
Yeah, let me just say this. First of all, the premise that this is in keeping what we're talking about with the FRA, this is billions of dollars lower than the FRA.
Say that again, how much?
Billions of dollars lower than what the FRA suggested. And I'll take a look at what this is. So this is lower than the FRA. We're not dealing with apples and apples here. So, but just to say this, there is got to be a balance here somewhere. I have cut spending. I negotiated a budget bill last December with Republicans and Democrats.
Right, but
House and Senate.
But we're talking about being $2 trillion in deficit spending this year. $2 trillion.
Well, let
when
me
we're
ask you-
$3 trillion in debt.
Well, but the fact of the matter is that you have no, what, and I'm assuming that 2017 tax cuts were something that were embraced. And there was no...
The revenue as a percentage of GDP had never been higher than it was a year ago, other than about the same height in 2000 and in 19...
revenue is not. We are not...
As a percentage of GDP,
Well,
as effectively 2 years ago, revenue had only been at that level twice before in the history of this country, ever.
Well,
That's just true.
There is no desire to deal with a balance between revenue and spending.
But hold on a
With
second.
all of
If we were at the highest level as a percentage of GDP that we've ever been, give or take,
Well,
a percentage.
I'm not going to take, I'm going to look at the numbers myself. I just don't take what you say by fiat here, is that is the absolute.
Well, as I say, let me Google that for you. It is in
Well,
fact
thank you.
the case that as a percentage of GDP, again, effectively about a year or two ago.
Well, where were you on the tax cuts in 2017? That was okay to do what we did, which was
But
$2 trillion.
the 2017 tax cuts
$2 trillion.
resulted in
no,
the
it did
2017
not.
cuts.
It didn't.
We ended up having, as of this time,
Right.
Happy to have a spirited discussion.
Right.
Just please, one at a time.
the
I hear you.
highest
Thank
the
you.
highest revenue as a percentage of gross domestic product that we've ever had.
Listen, my friend, that the people who benefited the most were the people who were at the 1/10 of 1% of the people in this nation, and the corporations and the special interests. Working Americans and middle-class families did not see the benefit of those tax cuts. And there was no one on your side of the aisle that expressed any view
So again,
that
going back
this
to
was going to add to the
Laura,
deficit.
So
$2 trillion.
going back to the
Sorry.
main point here, okay,
$2 trillion.
and in my time here, the point here is we had the highest percentage of revenue as a percentage of gross domestic product. And again, I'm saying give or take, there was two other times in history about the same level, 2000 and I can't remember, I don't know, maybe right after the war sometime. And so we had the highest percentage revenue. So as they say, it's not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem.
It's a revenue.
Now, it's not a revenue problem.
It is.
We have had for a long time an understanding of where we were going to be heading with respect to mandatory spending. For a long time, we've been watching that grow, knowing it's coming. We've done nothing about it. Neither party, by the way, has done nothing about it. So here we sit, and we're trying to constrain spending. We're trying to constrain spending in the discretionary pot, not really yet touching, obviously, mandatory, which neither party has been willing, frankly, to go down that road. My point here is we've got legislation in front of us. And again, speaking to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, as well as to people on the conservative bloc of this conference, that whether you love it or don't love it, it is legislation that would reduce spending. Again, speaking to my conservative colleagues who are out railing about this not doing anything, it would cut spending 8% for non-defense, non-veteran discretionary spending, which is significant, as evidenced by the concerns of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle of what that might mean for certain programs that the gentlelady has outlined and so forth. Mm-hmm. I believe that it's an important constraint, a constraint on the bureaucracy to be able to pull back and force adherence. So, for example, with DHS, the natural and predictable talking point about saying, oh, well, this is going to cut 8% of DHS, resulting in X billion dollars of cuts. Well, just for the average person listening out there, it is still higher than the 2021 levels that we were spending for DHS. It is only fractionally below that of the 2022 levels. My point being, DHS can figure out, like every other business or human has to do, how to manage its affairs without continual increases in spending. All we're saying is, yes, with DHS and every other agency, you need to figure out how to tighten the belt. The point of adding H.R. 2, it's not to the response to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. It is not hypocritical or contradictory to say You believe you need to have the policy choices that are supposed to be followed in the law being followed, as H.R. 2 evidences, and then say you can do that with whatever the total is, $60X billion instead of $60Y billion. Like, I don't know the exact numbers, but a reduction in your budget. It's not saying you can't do that. What we're saying is, and by attaching H.R. 2, we are trying to address the fundamental and complete debacle that is the southern border and what that now means for the rest of our country. I mean, the fact is, in my news feed that I get sent to me regularly from my staff, there is a constant stream every day of the impact of the border on our country in Texas. In just this morning's news feed, I had a story about 2,200 migrants in Eagle Pass and a mass crowd. I had a story about the masses in the Darien Gap. I had a story about the masses on a train in empty cars riding up through Mexico. I had a story about migrants and human smugglers wearing camouflage and jumping across walls and having video of that happening and getting away without being found. We have stories of the hundreds of rounds of ammunition and IED found on Texas soil on this side of the Rio Grande. We have stories of less than 4 days ago, a 10-year-old boy drowning in the Rio Grande while crossing with his mom. We have the story in years past of last year. This is an example of the 53 individuals who died in a tractor trailer in San Antonio. A story this morning, a more recent one, that was an older one, of Texas ranchers who live and work near the border are having their properties destroyed by the increase of illegal migrants trespassing. The stories of the local communities in Texas who are dealing with the impact on their schools, their hospitals, and their local economies. Going down the list of all of the impacts of what we're doing in Texas, the $10 billion, the $10 billion, you want to talk about appropriations? The $10 billion that Texans have appropriated to manage dealing with the border crisis, where the federal government, it's still my time, where the federal government is utterly refusing to do its job. $10 billion that the taxpayers of Texas have borne to manage dealing with it. The Texas Department of Public Safety that have intercepted and found 432 million lethal doses of fentanyl. That's what they've intercepted as DPS after it gets past Border Patrol because of how bad it is in Texas. And my Democrat colleagues scoff at this notion. And this is what is at the centerpiece of what we're trying to accomplish in this legislation. And so just a very direct message to my so-called conservative colleagues who right now apparently are ready to walk away from legislation that would, for 30 days, cut the non-defense, non-veteran spending for the discretionary spending by 8% and attaching H.R. 2, a bill that would massively reform our border and try to force the president to do his job, along with a Department of Defense bill that is funded at the level we embraced before, that would fund our troops and would undo a lot of the damage. I know my colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't agree. A lot of the damage of the social engineering of the Department of Defense. That is something that a number of my colleagues are willing to walk away from. I don't agree. I don't agree. And I applaud my colleagues here for working together to try to get that accomplished. I will stand alongside them and advocate for it. We have to find a path forward that doesn't involve just walking away and saying, nah, can't do that. We have an obligation to do it. And I will fight as hard as I can to get the most conservative and strongest approach we can possibly get. And I will hold the line where I think it's something that I can't vote for. But just sitting here as a Texan and American, if we do not secure the border, we are failing our fundamental responsibility as a republic, as leaders of this republic.
What I don't understand in that context is why would you want to cut, and I'll just say a point, why would you want to cut 8.1% from border security? I understand you listed the particulars, and I get that, which leads me to say, why then would you want to shortchange it? Tough, choices are a thing, but this arbitrary across-the-board cuts are another. And this is what it is, arbitrary in that regard. So that doesn't seem like a serious bill. We ought
I'm
to
trying
get
to be
down the
respectful. It's
real
my
work.
time. I didn't ask a question there. I want to,
Yeah,
but
okay.
so we can all move on.
Let us negotiate.
Look, my reason for that, my argument for that would be secure the border, okay? Secure the border. Actually do your job. Actually follow the law. And then come talk to me about what you want in terms of any additional dollars. But you're asking me to forego the power of the purse. That is to say that my responsibility to take tax dollars and borrowed dollars and give it to an administration that is fundamentally leaving the people I represent exposed. And not just my people, New Yorkers, Oklahomans, people across this country, Ohioans. You let the 10-year-old boy who died in a school bus on the first day of school a month ago. Like, I have an obligation to pressure and force this administration to do its job. And it is beyond my comprehension that I have colleagues on the other side of the aisle who don't seem to care about those policy choices and what it's doing to the people we represent. And I have colleagues on my side of the aisle who are about to walk away from something that we can possibly do here together to get across and send a message loudly and clearly that we should fund a government that will actually do its job and secure the border. So, with that, I mean, I could talk about the border in a significant amount. The only thing I'll just say is this, is that in H.R. 2, again, speaking to a number of folks on our side of the aisle, the amount of strong policies in the H.R. 2 bill cannot be overstated. And for all the folks out there ready to walk away from it, I would just caution you that you are walking away from the most important issue that we're dealing with right now for the people that we represent. And they want us to stand up and fight for them. So I applaud you all for working with us to try to move the ball forward, and I yield back.
Thank you.